Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest Legal Cheek virtual student event in partnership with BPP University Law School. I'm Juliet Griffiths, Head of Student Engagement here at Legal Cheek, and I'm very excited to introduce this afternoon's session, which is the first in a new series of SQE-themed virtual events that we're running with BPP. Although the SQE has now been in force for a handful of years, the assessments can still feel like a very insurmountable hurdle, especially given that over half of candidates who sat SQE1 in July of this year failed to pass both papers. Today, we're going to be exploring why so many candidates have been underperforming and how you can avoid these pitfalls when preparing for and sitting for the exams yourselves. So besides this, you can find out even more information about the SQE on our SQE FAQs page, which includes answers to your most frequently asked questions written by BPP's SQE experts. And if you're interested in looking at this in your own time, my colleague will post a link to this page in the chat in a moment. So moving on to this afternoon's event, I'm delighted to introduce BPP's City Consortium Plus programme and Essentials for Practice award leader, senior lecturer and fellow of the Higher Education Academy, Alison Banks, who will be chairing this afternoon's session. Alison is also joined by Brian, Charlotte, Chloe and Jacqueline, who are all currently studying or have studied the SQE with BPP. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon and for sharing your insights. Shortly, I'm going to drop off stage and hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves properly. But before I do so, I would just like to very quickly explain how this afternoon's event will work. For the next hour, we'll be hearing from BPP about how you can maximise your chances of success in the SQE, which I'm sure many students are wondering about. At around 5 p.m, I will pop back up on stage and direct you to the expo for an hour of virtual networking with the speakers, which is going to be a great opportunity to ask all of your burning questions. During this portion of the event here on stage, you can ask your questions as you go along in the chat tab, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. But it may be best to hold on to these until the networking, because we've got quite a packed schedule during this discussion. If you do want to post any questions in the chat as we go along, just make sure that it's set to stage as opposed to event so that we can see your questions as they come through. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alison to tell us about the SQE.
Thank you very much, Juliet, and a very warm welcome from me as well to this presentation. The subject of the presentation is why is the SQE so hard to pass? I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll be feeling a bit more confident in how you can succeed with the SQE. It is tough, but we've got the benefit of the wisdom of 4 current students with us here at BPP, or former students, who are able to speak to that SQE experience. I'm a little bit long in the tooth to have sat the SQE. I was from the LPC world, so you're really hearing it very much from people who've done it recently, and we're very happy to share the benefits of their wisdom. So in terms of introductions, let's just deal with that first of all. So as Juliet very kindly said, I'm Alison Banks. I'm an award leader, one of the SQE award leaders at BPP, based at our law school in Holborn. And I have particular responsibility for the City Consortium Plus programme, and also for our Essentials for Practice programme, which I'll talk about a little bit more at the end of this presentation. But I think it would be really nice to hear from each of our student contributors. So Jacqueline, if I can start with you, if you'd like to introduce yourself, just give us a line or two as to where you are with your SQE journey, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very pleased to do that. So I'm studying my full master's degree with BPP, which is called Legal Practice. I've completed the preparation for SQE1. I took the SQE1 in the summer and also passed it, and I'm now onto the SQE2 part of my course.
Congratulations, Jacqueline. Thank you very much. And Chloe, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I wrote and thankfully successfully passed SQE1 and 2 in 2023/going into 2024. and now I actually am a trainee at the BPP Legal Advice Clinic, and I'm about 7 months into my qualifying work experience. I also did complete BPP, adding on a term for Essentials for Practice. Thank you so much for having me and looking forward to answering some of your questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chloe. And Brian, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Brian and I am currently studying on the SQE 1 and 2 LLM part-time. I recently completed SQE 1 in January of this year and I've done SQE 2 just recently in November. So right now I'm just waiting for my SQE 2 results and I'm continuing studying with the LLM for Essentials of Practice.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brian. And Charlotte, finally, if I can come to you, please.
Hello everyone, I'm Charlotte. I'm currently on the City Consortium programme. So I did my SQE 1 in July, had the results, did my the equivalent of Essentials for Practice on the CCP programme, and have now just started on the SQE 2 section. Looking forward to answering any questions anyone might have.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we have had some questions come in already, which we will pick up as the presentation goes on. I'm looking forward to having a good and lively discussion about that. So in terms of what we're going to cover in this next kind of 45, 50 minutes or so before the networking session, I'm just going to give you a few headlines as to what the SQE is. Some of you may be quite familiar with it. Some of you may need a little bit more of an introduction, but also we'll reflect on the format and the content of those SQE assessments. We're going to then move on to think about how best to prepare for those assessments. Of course, they're really high stakes assessments, really important. This is now the way in which people can qualify as solicitors. So the LPC is very much receding in terms of availability. It's very much now the world of the SQE. So how is it possible to prepare for those exams in the best and most efficient way? We'll also touch on SQE pass rates and look at those, and also think about the sort of courses that are available to students looking to qualify now as a solicitor. There is a wide range that students can choose from, but you need to kind of be aware of the kind of pros and cons of those different forms. Of course. And then there will be obviously an opportunity for Q&A. So as Juliet said, you may want to put questions into the comments, but we do have some questions that we've been asked to look at in advance. So it may very well be that we actually kind of deal with those questions quite naturally as the presentation goes on. So let's deal first of all with what is the SQE. What is it? And I'm aware that we may have students who are studying law degrees at the moment. We may have students on the call who are thinking about law, who are curious about doing law, but are currently studying something else. So in terms of what the SQE is, let's deal with that. So the SQE is now, as I said, the main and very shortly the only pathway really to qualify as a solicitor in England and Wales. What do you need fundamentally? Well, you will need a degree or equivalent. It doesn't have to be a law degree, but most students, as we'll see, either have done a law degree, or if they haven't done a law degree, they've done some form of conversion course to give them the fundamental kind of black letter law that they need to be familiar with. So you need that, and then the SQE itself falls into two parts. So SQE 1 being the multiple choice elements assessments, we'll look at that more closely in a moment. And it's important to confirm here that you have to have succeeded and successfully passed SQE Part 1 before you can even register to sit SQE 2, which is where you are assessed on your legal skills as well as your legal knowledge. So you have to complete SQE 1 and SQE 2. SQE 2 may potentially be done as part of qualifying work experience, or what we're seeing now as the market is really quite mature is that a lot of students and a lot of employers want their students to have completed SQE 2 before they start their qualifying work experience. But it is possible to do SQE 2 in tandem or during your qualifying work experience. Qualifying work experience is 2 years for many employers or many students entering the profession. That will be through a traditional training contract route, which I'm sure you're very well familiar with. But one way in which the regime has kind of liberalised routes and pathways to qualification is that actually you can stitch together different periods of qualifying work experience, not necessarily with one employer. And that's part of the SRA's thinking in remodelling the way in which solicitors are trained and educated, to ensure that all solicitors have done exactly the same form of assessment, SQE1, SQE2, as we've discussed, but also that they have more variety in terms of how they qualify. So it's not necessarily just by a 2-year traditional training contract. And of course, the SRA need to be satisfied that anyone who wants to qualify as a solicitor is of suitable character and suitability. So that's something that's obviously you will need to consider down the line. Okay, so let's deal first of all with SQE1. What I'm showing you here are the 2 papers that you sit in SQE1 and the coverage. So just kind of turning to my panel here, I'll start with you, Jacqueline, if that's all right. So you can see that we've got these kind of subjects in white: contract law, tort law, for example, in paper 1, and we've got land law and trust and criminal law, paper 2. Did you study a law degree, Jacqueline? Did you do a conversion course? What was your kind of background before you joined us for our SQE program?
I studied a law degree, so I have a degree in law with business. So all of these kind of underlying modules were really fresh in my mind when I started preparing for the SQE1. And I cannot stress how much that has been an advantage to me. Yeah, absolutely. Because it was just a matter of revising the black letter law modules rather than getting to grips with them then and there.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask Chloe, Brian, Charlotte, did you do law degrees or did you do a conversion course? Chloe, let's start with you.
I did. I agree. I did your classic LLB, and I think, as Jacqueline said, it was very helpful to have that knowledge fresh. I did it. I went into studying the SQE straight after finishing my undergrad.
Yeah. Okay, so it was relatively fresh in your mind. Absolutely. Brian, how about you?
Same as Chloe. I studied additional LLB at my undergraduate level, and as soon as I graduated, I started with the SQE. So, like Chloe said beforehand, some stuff was really fresh in my mind, some stuff not so fresh, but it bounced back pretty quickly.
Okay, that's good to know. And Charlotte, are we going to have a full house of law graduates here?
You are indeed. Yeah, I also did a law degree. 6 months off and then started my SQE, so pretty fresh as well for me.
Okay, so a kind of similar experience. So I think what comes across very strongly here is that in SQE, students are being assessed not just on what used to be the kind of LPC style kind of practice level subjects, but actually on the really fundamental legal principles that were either covered in a traditional LLB law degree or in a conversion course. So really important that when you're embarking on your SQE journey, that, and this will be individual for each student, that you think about when did I acquire this knowledge? How did I acquire it? Was it on a law degree? Or if, like me, you studied English, I don't think I would have been comfortable going into SQE without having done a full conversion course. And of course, now conversion courses are very much, and degrees I expect as well, for many, are being kind of crafted with SQE in mind, so that you do have, that kind of fundamental, core legal principles to hand. So each of paper 1 and paper 2, you will be, covering content or material that you would have studied either in the context of a law degree or in a law conversion course. Then the items that I'm showing you now are what tend to be what, kind of SQE providers teach. So things like business law and practice, dispute resolution, property practice, wills and administration of estates, criminal practice, and solicitors' accounts. So these, by their nature, you can see this kind of reference to practice that kind of permeates a lot of these subjects. These are intended to be more of the kind of practical legal application stuff, rather than the, kind of the really core legal principles. So it builds on your knowledge of contract law and tort law and, trusts, etc. But it's then taking it to another level in terms of the practical application. And you can see that in each of these papers, you're covering both kind of practice content and the core content. So it's actually quite a lot to get to grips with. So the papers, as you can see, they're multiple choice questions. They're completely closed book. I don't know whether anyone feels able, all of you now having successfully kind of come through the SQE1 journey, can you give us a sense of what the day is like when you do your SQE1 exam? Anyone like to take this one? Charlotte, shall I start with you?
In terms of like the actual day of the exam and how it's structured?
Yes, that would be great. Yeah. Yes, please.
Okay, so I was actually in quite a small test centre for mine. Some of the really large test centres in London, very well run. They're very much organised by Kaplan. Some of them you're in a driving test centre. That's what I was in, but equally well run. There were just 9 of us taking it. And so you do SQE paper 1, it's called FLK1, 1 week, and then the next week FLK2. And you would do, it's a 5-hour exam, but it's split into 2.5 sessions, 2.5 hour sessions with a break in between. And it's kind of famously quite rigid what you can take into the exam. It's been well known that there's no water allowed and things like that. But I didn't actually find that too much of an issue, because once you're in the exam mode, you just kind of head down, answer the questions. So although beforehand I was like, oh, how am I going to cope? You find it's actually okay. Good.
That's really good. And we'll talk about your kind of preparation for it and that sort of thing as the session goes on. But as you say, quite long assessments, probably quite draining, quite tiring, and having to kind of flit between different subjects and kind of think quickly in terms of how you process.
That is actually the thing, is that it's not sorted by all the business questions one, then all the talk. They are all mixed up, so you have to be pretty on it, making sure you identify what they're asking.
Good stuff. Okay, thank you very much. Jacqueline, Chloe, Brian, anything that you wanted to add, or was your experience similar to Charlotte's?
My experience was quite similar to Charlotte's. I would just say there's also a break, about an hour break in the 5-hour exam. So you do get to go and have some food. There's a lot of debate between people on, do you study during that hour, or do you take it to kind of rest your brain and have a little bit of a moment to yourself? That's up to each individual. I personally chose to have a rest, to have some food and to just relax for a bit. And I found that really recharged me for the second half, because it is a very tiring day.
Absolutely. And I think now with SQE1, because obviously so many students are doing SQE now, it used to be the case that there were only 2 sittings, like you do paper 1 on one day, paper 2 on another. Now it's basically across 2 weeks, isn't it? And you've got your choice of, you do paper 1 on, it might be the Monday of the first week, and paper 2 might be on the Thursday of the second week, because so many students are now doing SQE. Okay. Very good. So just in terms of MCQs, if I can ask you, Jacqueline, had you done many MCQs before you came onto SQE? Or was it a feature of your assessment, when you did your law degree?
No, it was definitely not a feature of my law degree. Everything was assessed on an essay basis, sort of 1 grade at the end of the semester. So that was definitely one of the biggest differences in terms of like shifting your style to learning, and you realizing that you can't postpone everything until the last 2 weeks of the semester, when typically essays are being done. You need to work consistently with the MCQs.
So important. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm sure we'll come on to this, but some questions that have come in from people on the call about, when to start studying. It's like as soon as you can. And in particular, if it's been some time since you did a law degree, or you might have been in the first year of your law degree that you looked at contract or tort, when you are getting serious about doing SQE, it's never too early to start refreshing your knowledge on that side of things. So I don't know, Brian, just to bring you in on that, can you kind of give us some insight in terms of how you were able to prepare for the MCQs? Did you have plenty of kind of materials that you could work with, that we provided you with at BPP? What sort of approach did you take to preparing for SQE1?
So in terms of preparing for MCQs, in my undergraduate, I started in COVID. So they kind of started implementing MCQs. So I remember for my first year of property law, I was doing some MCQs, contract law. So I was in kind of the habit, but traditionally you're mostly focused on essays, as others have said. In terms of switching that from SQE 1 now, in terms of the support from BPP, it was really good. There was BP Adapts where we could go online, and then after you read each slide, then you'd have 5 MCQs where you can test your knowledge of what you've just read, so you can know that, okay, maybe I wasn't too familiar with this certain element of the law, let me read that again. And then at the end there'll be some topic MCQs which you could practice again. So once you've done a topic, then you can reinforce your knowledge and your learning. Once it comes down to halfway through the course, about November, I think it is, then you have a 1 week gap where you're able to have some practice papers provided by BPP. And in that, you can just do the formatives, which are the practice papers. You can do them open book, so you can kind of get an understanding of, okay, this is the elements where I need to go over again. And then by the time the course finishes in December, you have 2 papers if you're doing the LLM. You
That's
have
right.
2 papers which you would undergo. So you do FOK 1, which is the paper 1, and then FOK 2 on another day. And those are 100 questions, and it gets you into the preparation mood for how to say an MCQ. After you've done that and you're awaiting your results, there's further practice papers from BPP as well. So we had the ability to go into the Oxford University Press, which was included within the course, and that enabled you to practice many different styles of questions. So you weren't only just looking at BPP style questions, but you're also looking at other style questions as well, which I think is really helpful because the providers themselves don't know what the actual exam will look like because of the strict NDA. So it's also just nice to get into the habit of seeing different styles of questions, so you're not too comfortable as well. And then BPP also provides some further practice, full set practice papers as well with OUP and with BPP themselves. And then there's up to you essentially, where if you want more practice papers, then of course you can have some as well, where you can buy some online, or you can go on some free resources as well. I chose in my panic to buy some more. Because you can never have too many questions, can you? So I chose to do them. So I bought the revised books, which I found personally helpful for myself, which had full practice sitting papers. So a week before each practice paper, just to know that I'm on this right lines, I'll do the practice paper, see that I've got a pass overall, stop my panic a bit, and then the next week then continue. So there's a lot of practice papers online as well, but BPP provides you with so many, and I think there's an app now where you can even practice them on your phone if you choose to do so. So the practice papers, you have so many opportunities to practice. So if you go with a prep course like BPP, you don't need to buy more, but if you choose to do so, there's some online as well.
Out there. Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely something that we have been developing as time's gone on in response to student feedback. Students, I think there are, a few, obviously, a lot of anxiety about SQE, as we've talked about. It's their high stakes assessments, they're challenging assessments, and understandably, students want to have the best platform possible. So over time, I think we've really at BPP we've developed what we offer students in terms of MCQ practice, and in lots of different formats, getting feedback on MCQs as well. Not just the answer was right, but why the wrong answers were wrong. So that's just something that we are very committed to developing over time. And as far as those kind of subjects and wider concerned, the material that will have been studied by students previously on a conversion course for a law degree, we do have resources that we provide to students as kind of refresh resources. There are also kind of live lectures that students can join if they've got kind of revision queries. And so it's not just about the stuff that we teach in terms of business law and practice, etc. It's also ensuring that students have access to material that can help them refresh their underlying law knowledge. Okay, thank you. So I'm sure really helpful stuff, guys. Thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to some of these themes a little bit later. I just want to move on to briefly touch on SQE2. So SQE1, as we know, is all about the MCQ assessments, as been described by the panel. SQE2 is a different beast. You can only sit it if you've passed SQE1, and you need to pass both papers, of course, in SQE1. And in SQE2, students are being assessed on their legal knowledge, but also on their practical legal skills. And in fact, the marks that are attached to SQE2, 50% are attached to the legal knowledge, and 50% are attached to the written skills. So there's quite a lot to kind of digest from this diagram. Please don't kind of worry if it doesn't kind of resonate with you straight away. But the main thing to kind of point out really is that you will have a number of oral skills assessments in a particular legal context. So you will do advocacy, both in the context of criminal litigation and dispute resolution. And you will also do a client interview with an actor, and you will need to produce an attendance note of that interview, and that will be in the context of property practice and wills. The written skills, so the oral skills are all done in person, aren't they, at a centre? And I'm sure that the guys who've done SQE2 might be able to speak to that a little bit. And then the written skills are done at a Pearson View Centre. I think I'm right in saying that they're done in the same sort of format as SQE1. But the written skills, you're being assessed on your case and matter analysis, your legal research, your legal writing, and legal drafting. All of those skills are assessed in the context of business. And then 2 out of the 4 will be assessed in the context of criminal litigation, dispute resolution, property practice, or wills. And I think on the day, you know whether or not it's going to be criminal litigation, dispute resolution, but you don't know which of those skills will actually come up in that context. And the same for property and wills, if I've understood that correctly, guys. So those of you who've done SQE2, anything that you wanted to kind of say in terms of how the SQE2 experience was for you? Obviously not, kind of going into the detail of what you were assessed on, but how did it feel compared to SQE1? Maybe Chloe, if I start with you, because I think you have done SQE2, haven't you?
I think the main difference between the two is probably the oral part of SQE2, which I think makes a few people quite nervous because you're on display, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it is really about controlling your nerves at that point, which is an added element to over and above understanding the knowledge that you need to know and the skill. You do need to control your nerves so that you are able to showcase that you do know the law and that you are able to do the skill. This is something that you do as a lawyer every day,
Yes.
interviewing clients and advocacy. So it is something that unfortunately one must come to grips with. But you do get a chance to practice it a lot with BPP. They do lots of kind of mock client interviews, mock advocacy. I personally also, they give you lots of scenarios that you can practice with. And I personally made my family all pretend to be my clients and I went and interviewed them. So with practice, it's something that you really can do. It's not impossible, but your nerves are something you're going to have to take into account and just think about in the past when you've done an oral at school, what techniques work for you to keep yourself calm.
That's very, very good advice. And I think also it's worth saying, I mean, there are 16 separate assessments you do in SQE2. Again, not to kind of go into the detail of how, how it's assessed, but you need to pass SQE2 overall. So it may be that you have a little bit of a slip on one of the skills in one of the contexts, but that is likely to be balanced out by a kind of a better performance in another skill in another context. And so you need to pass it overall. And that is quite complicated algorithms in terms of how it's all marked and graded and so on. But as we'll see, the pass rate for SQE2 is very, very high. It's higher than SQE1. Of course, to get to SQE2, you need to have passed SQE1. So there's a kind of natural kind of gateway before you can actually sit those SQE2 assessments. And of course, although the legal knowledge is really important in SQE2, you also have the opportunity to really impress the assessors with your practical legal skills. And, as Chloe said, at BPP, we have a very good SQE2 training provision to give students plenty of practice, plenty of opportunities for feedback, and you can even enlist your family members, as Chloe said, to be your guinea pigs if you want them to role play an interview. Charlotte, if I can just turn to you, because you're actually in SQE2 training at the moment, aren't you? What have been your first kind of impressions as to how you're going to be prepared for the assessments, which I think you're doing in January, February, is that right?
Yeah, the February sit for me.
Mhm.
I was pretty much like everyone, very apprehensive about the oral skills. So I was pretty relieved to see that we have 4 weeks of taught sessions on both advocacy and client interviewing, and then also legal drafting, and then 2 sessions on the other written skills. So far I've had 2 of my advocacy workshops, and it already seems like I'm making some progress. The tutor's been so great for advocacy. Really stand out in terms of like putting herself in our shoes, and like, oh, this is what I would do if I was a student, and this is how I prepare. Lots of practice, lots of peer feedback, lots of tutor feedback as well. So it's really been helpful in terms of easing certainly some nerves. Obviously, as Chloe said, when you get into the exam, it's a different beast. But just the provisional, like making sure you use the right language, that's just kind of we're drilling that early, so it kind of becomes second nature. In terms of like the other skills, it's been kind of like guided past papers so far. So we haven't attempted it, bring it to the lesson, get some feedback, and then kind of go away and practice more. But there's been lots of practice papers provided by BPP, both their ones and the SQE ones. So there's plenty of time. We've got some formatives coming up, and then some tutor formatives as well. So by the time we get there, it should be like, we're pretty familiar with the formats, I think.
Hopefully it will just feel like second nature, and just kind of, you know, slipping on a pair of slippers and just, right, okay, I know what I'm doing here. And, you know, as I said, the pass rates are very high, so that, you know, is all to the positive, I would say. Okay, brilliant. So let's move on in terms of how best to kind of prepare for the SQE. So we've talked about what the SQE is. We've had some questions submitted from audience members about the timeline for completing SQE. So what I thought I would just run through very quickly with you is a potential timeline for students who might be looking to study full-time from September 2025, or indeed part-time. So looking at students who might be considering starting an SQE program, let's say with a provider like BPP in September next year, how would your SQE timeline look? So our students who start with us on our full-time programs starting in September 2025 would start SQE1 preparation with us. And then it would be with a view to most students sitting at the first possible opportunity. SQE1 currently is only assessed in January and July of each year, so there are only 2 sittings a year. So our courses either start in September with a view to students sitting in January, or in February with a view to students sitting in July, as far as SQE1 is concerned. So most of our students on our master's programs will start in September 25. They'll do SQE1 preparation with us, and you've heard from the students on the call about how we prepare you for SQE1. Then they sit SQE1, the centralised assessments. Now, most students then, they have a short break, and then they come back to start their SQE2 prep studies with us. And of course, at that point, they won't know whether or not they have passed SQE1. But nonetheless, that is the kind of process that most of our full-time students do. Results for SQE1 tend to come out reasonably quickly, you know, about 6 or 7 weeks after you sit. So those results are published by the SRA, so let's say March 2026. If you've been successful, there's then a short window of time that you can then book on to sit SQE2. Now, you may have pre-booked. The SRA kind of changes its process from time to time. It used to be a bit like kind of getting Taylor Swift tickets or Oasis tickets. It's not quite that way now. There's a much kind of more managed kind of process for booking onto assessments. But at BPP, we guide students through that as well in terms of the timings for doing things and that sort of thing. So As I said, most students, if they've succeeded and they've passed SQE1, brilliant, they can sit SQE2 from April, May, and they will have been prepared for that, obviously doing our SQE2 prep course. And then SQE2 results take quite a bit longer because we've got oral assessments as well as written assessments. It's not a question of MCQs being auto-marked. It takes time for those assessments to be marked and moderated and compared. And so it's usually about 3 or 4 months before you get those final SQE2 results. So most students, I would say, probably follow the full-time course above, but it's possible you might want to take a pause. You might want to think, actually, I want to see if I can get SQE1 under my belt first, get my results from SQE1 and kind of decouple that from then coming back to study SQE2. In which case you would start SQE2 preparation with us in July, August, with a view to sitting SQE2 in October. So you would get your results, around 6 months later than on the diagram I've just shown you. So the advantage of doing that, I guess, is that you have a sense of kind of comfort as to whether or not you've passed SQE1 before you are committing to studying SQE2. However, the disadvantage is that you can't kind of use that structure if you want to access master's funding. So the structure above, if you do SQE1 with us, SQE2 and Essentials to Practice, that is a full LLM and you can access master's funding as a result. So the diagram at the bottom isn't, something that, or you wouldn't be able to qualify for master's funding if you decided to opt for that route. If you're considering studying part-time, so our part-time courses run across 2 years. So I think, Brian, you're on a part-time course with us, aren't you? So run across 2 years. We offer part-time evening, part-time day, part-time Saturday provision, obviously subject to demand and, in different centres. But what happens with our part-time cohorts is they do start in February or September, but they're studying for SQE1 obviously over a longer period than our full-time students. So students who would start with us as part-time students in February next year would be aiming to sit SQE1 in January of 2026 and so on and so forth. Okay, so what I would say is we've got a virtual open evening next week, in fact, and you can find details of that on our website. But there are lots of different ways in which you can structure your studying and your learning to suit your individual circumstances. Okay. So let's move on then to preparing for the SQE, and this is where we are able to bring in the fantastic questions that we have from the audience. So we've grouped those questions according to themes, because obviously a lot of the questions will have, have a similar kind of vibe to them. So I'm just going to show the first question in terms of before you start an SQE prep course. So what students do before starting the SQE prep course to get themselves in a better position? Jacqueline, is there any words of wisdom that you'd like to share on this?
Well, to be completely fair with you, there's nothing that I did because I was coming off the back of a law undergrad. However, I'm now able to reflect on that, and I would definitely say that it would be good to start revising some of the black letter law subjects even before, because you've got the material, you've got the knowledge, and it's just a matter of getting into it again. I think that it was also quite hard readjusting to university after you've had a really long summer's break, and it doesn't start with an introduction and things like that like the undergrad would. It starts with the actual modules. So be prepared to learn in everything by getting yourself into the sort of mindset and having a schedule and all of that. Everything, every little thing that works for you in terms of preparation, staying on top of the work.
That's really good advice. And as you said, Jacqueline, when you're doing a postgraduate program here at BPP compared to an undergraduate program somewhere else, it is hitting the ground running because, of course, those centralized assessment dates, those are fixed. Those aren't in our gift. And we have to kind of structure our program around those centralized assessments to make sure we give students enough time to prepare for them. And so, as you say, basically that first week that you're in, yes, there will be induction, but you will be expected to do quite substantive work as well, and keep to that kind of pattern of a routine of work and kind of keeping on top of things. It's definitely not a kind of one essay a week sort of style course. It's much more kind of workshop based, isn't it? And you know, kind of working on tasks collaboratively and spinning lots of wheels. So that's a really honest reflection. Thank you. Charlotte, was there anything you wanted to add there in terms of getting yourself in the best position before SQE prep?
I would definitely say that the specification for SQE1 is available online, and
Great, good shout.
If you've done a conversion course, chances are you've covered everything you need. But if you've done a law degree, like my law degree, certainly in public law, we focused on very different topics, what was covered in the SQE. So it was kind of a case of using the BPP resources once I started to kind of reteach, well, not even reteach, just teach myself in the first place. So if you can go through early and flag what you don't think you've covered, or you weren't paying attention in those lectures maybe, or you real or something, just what you haven't done at your undergraduate degree, if you can get on top of that as soon as possible, then you can dedicate time once you start to do these new practice subjects, and you don't have to go back over the black letter law as such.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I'm just going to show these at the same time because they're quite similar. That's a really good shout that Charlotte said. You know, if you're serious about qualifying as a solicitor, make sure that you have got that SRA website bookmarked, that you know the SQE specification. It's not set in stone. They do change it because obviously the law changes and, you know, it is updated and so on. So it's something that, you know, is our kind of source of truth when it comes to how we design our programs and the content that we're teaching students, is that it's very much aligned to that SQE specification on the SRA's website. So do make sure that you're looking at that. So I think we've kind of covered the question from our Birmingham student in terms of you know, helping them to be successful. I suppose it's, you know, particularly if you're doing a law degree, it's obviously paying particular attention to the material that could come up in SQE. Question about gap years. Anything that anyone wanted to mention there? I don't know, Chloe or Brian, anything you wanted to chip in there?
I may chip in shortly. I'll just do it. I would just say that this is very much personally about where you are after you finish your university degree. The kind of benefit of going straight into your SQE prep courses, you have that, and that black letter law really fresh. I personally took a couple months, only because I was a little bit burnt out after my law degree, which some people may be as well. So I think just take some stock of your own mental health and figure out where you are. If a break will be beneficial to you, by all means, I would suggest doing that. If you would like to go straight into it and you feel that you're ready, then also do that.
Absolutely right. Yeah, everyone is an individual. Everyone will have a different kind of feel about their readiness to kind of get going on this. And one thing that I think is really important is that, you know, we'll come on to the pass rates in a second. You need to be able to sit SQE when you're in the best possible position to sit it and the best possible position to pass it. So if that means actually, you know, you do need a bit of time out so that you can kind of reset or whatever it might be, then it's probably best to do that before you embark on those SQE studies, and you know, commit yourselves to sitting those SQE assessments, because they are, you know, they are tough, but you know, with the right sort of preparation, the right kind of setup, you know, you can certainly do it, and all of you on the call, you're all testament to doing that. So just conscious of time, just going to rattle through a few more questions. I'm going to pop them all up here. So we had some questions about during your SQE prep course. So let's deal with the question kind of bottom right. So aspects of the SQE that the candidates typically find most challenging, and how those areas being addressed in the prep courses. So Brian, anything you wanted to kind of add on that question, please?
So I think one of the things that's most challenging is obviously the MCQ aspect of SQE1, for example. And I think that's more down to even exam technique rather than your fundamental knowledge of the actual law. And I think how BP helps in terms of actually having your 5 workshops which you attend a week, whether you do that part full time, that is, where you're able to go with a tutor and then talk, and they run through some MCQs with you, and then they can show you how to actually approach the questions, where actually you notice certain things like words such as should have or could have, how that can fundamentally change an answer from it being one way to another way. And once you start to see those certain aspects, then it also does help you prepare. So when you see a practice question where you see like, oh, okay, that it's dealing with an absolute certainty, but you know there's exceptions, you can immediately rule that out. So I think in terms of dealing with like the challenges of exam technique rather than even the law itself, it's so helpful to have someone who's actually knowledgeable in the law, not only through theory but in practice as well.
That's really good to hear. And it's really nice to hear that kind of feedback in terms of the workshop experience and that ability just to talk to, a person in the classroom who, will either have been, will have been a solicitor, will have experience in that kind of legal area. And so it's really able to support students in that way. So that's really nice. Thank you, Brian. Just Charlotte, if I can just ask you one question on the slide here about balancing the social life alongside preparing for SQE can feel overwhelming. Do you have any tips in terms of how to structure your time and priorities to enjoy your university experiences and stay committed to your studies? So, not sure how much, but you may have really enjoyed every aspect of SQE, but tell us more.
Very mixed, I would say. But I think that it is kind of a slight misconception, certainly as a full-time, if you're doing this full-time, to think of yourself as a university student. I think it's much more appropriate to think of yourself as having a 9-to-5 job. And dedicating, because you're not in every day, because there's only 5, well, I say only 5, 5 is plenty, but there are 5 workshops in the week and then all the preparation around it. So if you do like a 9-to-5 day every week, certainly at the start, 5 days a week, then you'll cover what you need to cover. You'll be ready for the sessions, and then you can use your evenings and to some extent protect your weekends. As it does get closer to the exam, panic sets in, you need to start revising. It gets a bit more tense, but certainly for the most part, I mean, you're also with fellow students that are through exactly the same experience you are. You'll make friends very quickly because you kind of always do with these kind of environments. And I found that it was actually I felt like I was able to maintain my interests throughout. It wasn't like a all-encompassing, oh, I'm never going to leave my house again kind of thing.
That's really good to hear. And I think so many students are going through it at the same time. You do develop a real community of practice. And I know I've heard from students that they've made really kind of long-lasting friendships on this program. It is a different experience from doing an undergraduate degree, certainly. And it is more, I think, as Charlotte said, it is more like this is your transition to practice. So actually getting into that habit of, working, regular kind of business hours, if you can kind of be disciplined in that way, that can hopefully mean that it isn't as overwhelming. Of course, there will be pinch points and really difficult points in terms of timings, but hopefully you will get through it. Just going to zip on, and I'm going to ask Jacqueline and Chloe maybe to chip in on these. So in terms of revising and sitting the exams, if we can maybe think about revising first of all, let me just go back a little bit. Chloe, do you have any tips in terms of, how you revised, so how you structured your revision? So we've got a good question here from a student in Cardiff.
I think the key with revision is starting early. The breadth of this exam will be the biggest you've probably ever faced in your life. Apologies, I just don't want to lie to you. No. It is a very, very large amount of work that you need to understand. So revision has to start early. Leaving it to 3 weeks before the exam will not make you successful, unfortunately, unless you are a wonder kid, which you may be. But I would say start early. And for BPP, for example, your workshops there were probably about 3 to 4 workshops a week. And I tried to memorize each topic of the workshop each week for that workshop. So I started my memorizing every day, little bit by little bit, and not leaving anything to the last minute. I would say I hand wrote some notes. There's some kind of complicated processes in the law, kind of flow charts and everything that I found very helpful. So I think it's really about knowing what techniques work for you. I personally like writing things down because it helps me memorize things.
Remember.
stick to the techniques you know work for you and start
Yeah.
revising really early, and do have a timetable. I think, as Charlotte said, you need that SRA list of everything that you need to know that backwards, and start going over it, and note down where you know that you need to do some more work, and actually schedule that into your week.
Very good advice. Thank you very much. Jacqueline, anything you wanted to add in terms of, the approach to revision?
Yeah, I completely agree with Chloe, and in essence, doing everything that you can do and taking things sort of in your hands, the things that you can have in your control is essential, because on the day of the exam, you are going to be faced with questions that you don't know. I think all of us have. I think it's only natural. So you have the opportunity to kind of balance that with the questions that you absolutely know that you're prepared for. And for me, having a kind of a rigid timetable each week was key, even though it meant that sometimes I wasn't necessarily able to go out and do the things that I wanted to. But that's okay, because it was only for a few months. And I think that we all pretty much know or expect this when we embark this on the SQE preparation. As Chloe said, it's probably going to be the most subject heavy exam of your lives. So it's quite advisable to do it once and do it well, I'd say.
I agree, which is why it's so valuable to have you guys on this call, and the ability to share that really fresh and relevant experience with the students who've joined us. I think we've covered quite a few of the points here already quite naturally. So in terms of managing your time during SQE1, I suppose you have to move quite quickly, don't you, through those MCQs? I think someone calculated that you've got like 1 minute and 42 seconds per MCQ. I haven't sat the exam myself. So although that sounds like not much time, it's you have got some thinking time built in there. But I guess to give yourself the best possible chance, you need to answer all those questions. It's like any assessment in that respect. Okay. So thank you guys. As I said, just conscious of time because we've got another kind of 8 or 9 minutes, and then we're coming to the networking session. So it may be that people on the call have got individual questions that they'd like to raise with us then, which we're more than happy to help with. So I'm just going to deal with some final kind of points in terms of SQE pass rates. So what I'm just kind of showing you here are the SQE1 results over a number of different sittings. Just to point out, we don't have data for July 2023, BPP data, because we had very few students sitting in that particular sit. So statistically, it isn't helpful to share. But what I want to kind of show is that the pass rate, you can see the national pass rate for the first sit ranges from 59% from January this year to 48% in July this year. But what we're really pleased to show is that students who studied with us here at BPP have a really good pass rate overall. So that covers students from all cohorts. As we said there on the slide, we're not just including students who have been sponsored by particular law firms. We're looking much more broadly than that. So we're really proud of that. We think that shows that the programs that we're delivering are really helping our students to succeed. But obviously we would want that to be higher. We're constantly looking at how we can improve our programs to give students the best possible chance. As our panelists have said, it's tough, SQE1. It's not for the faint-hearted. You have to be well prepared for it. So do take on board, the very good advice that you've had from the panelists in terms of how best to prepare for SQE. As far as SQE2 is concerned, pass rate's much higher. The national pass rates are much higher. But of course, you have to have passed SQE1 before you can go on to sit SQE2. So we would expect SQE2 results to have a significantly higher pass rate. But even there, again, really proud to say that we've got a very good, story to tell as far as BPP is concerned, and looking at how our students have done. Again, there's a couple of sittings we haven't included, one in October, I think, one in January, where we had very few students sitting. So again, statistically, it doesn't really help to share those stats with you. But what you can see here is that our BPP pass rate is significantly up and above the national pass rate. So again, really proud of that, and credit to the students for working so hard and doing so well. So I just wanted to kind of round off by just explaining to you what you might be looking into. If you are thinking about SQE, you're thinking about qualifying as a solicitor, what are the possible routes that are open to you in terms of SQE prep courses? So I think, you know, there are a variety. It's quite a big market now in terms of how students can be prepared for SQE prep. So whereas, you know, the LPC was the only way, and there were lots of different providers that did the LPC, for SQE, there isn't a specific course that you need to do as far as the SRA is concerned to sit and pass SQE. It's completely open, left open for students to choose. So some students might choose to do a kind of an SQE prep course, which is basically just kind of materials based, and that will be, you know, at the cheaper end of the spectrum. There may be providers that aren't universities, but do provide students with the opportunity to attend courses. There will also be SQE diplomas, which will focus on SQE1 and SQE2, or, you know, some providers, BPP included, offer students an SQE master's course, where students are prepared for SQE1 and SQE2, but in their final term with us, they also study essentials practice, which is basically electives material that relate to different, you know, key practice areas that law firms are really interested in. So lots of options, and of course, you know, the cost commensurately does go up. The thing to mention about the first three here on the slide is that none of those would attract student loan company funding. Whereas if you were to opt for a master's course, you can then access that master's funding, which, you know, may be of interest to students on the call. So as I say, you know, there is quite a lot out there that you can be exposed to and kind of look into, but just be aware of the kind of pros and cons of each. And obviously, I would very much advocate for the master's course, because that's the program that I'm partly responsible for. But what the really big advantage of that is the substantial in-person teaching that you receive, the extended topics that you study as part of essentials practice that really will help you when you get into your law firm or you're doing your qualifying work experience. All of the information about our different SQE programs, obviously you can access on the BPP website. And as I said, we have very regular virtual open evenings, and we really welcome students to attend those. So I'm just going to deal very, very briefly with the last a few questions, just to get the final thoughts from our colleagues here on the call. So how much of the low pass rate is due to lack of knowing the content versus lack of understanding of the exam, i.e. understanding question or exam technique? So if I can have a 30-second contribution from one of you guys, who'd like to take this one? Any thoughts? Or shall I give you my thoughts?
Jump in
Sorry,
there.
go ahead, Chloe.
That's all right. I would say that it's both, to be honest. I think that half of it is probably needing to understand the technique of the exam and specifically practicing MCQs. You could know the law backwards, but if you don't know how to do an MCQ style exam, unfortunately, you probably wouldn't pass. So you need both. You need the technique and you do need the understanding of the law.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Very good advice. Who'd like to deal with the question from the student from Kiel? So do you find this a difference in pass rates depending on whether someone has previous career experience? Anyone feel able to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take
Thanks,
this one.
Declan.
I find that there's absolutely no difference because a person in practice will have experience in a particular area, whereas in the SQE we cover so many, it's impossible to have experience in all of them. So it pretty much doesn't matter if you have career experience or not.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think it's important also to kind of say there that with SQE2, you're being assessed to day one solicitor standard. And it was kind of envisaged with SQE that students would be doing qualifying work experience while sitting SQE2. That just hasn't been the case for the vast majority of students and employers. Employers are looking by and large to get their students through SQE2 before they start with the firm. But nonetheless, that's the standard that you're meant to achieve. That's a really good point that Jacqueline has mentioned, because obviously, you're being assessed in oral skills in criminal. You might be doing a training contract in, a city law firm. So that's not something you would have any practice experience in. So really good points there. Thanks, Jacqueline. So in terms of specific aspects of SQE assessments you think non-law graduates find most challenging, we don't have any non-law graduates apart from me on the call. And how can we best prepare for those areas? But I don't know, Brian, is there anything that you think that you could add here, please?
I think in terms of non-law, for most people who are non-law, they would have done a conversion course. So you
Great.
find that actually you're doing the conversion course, and then immediately you're starting SQE 1. So there isn't too much. Maybe you may have more of an advantage because it's so fresh. You've literally done it a few weeks beforehand. So some of my course mates have said that's the case for them. So I think it's easier for some people if you're non-law because you would have done a conversion course, and the knowledge is literally, you've just learned it. So you're just repeating what you've learned.
And as you say, very much kind of tailored towards what SQE assesses, whereas over a law degree, there's much more variety, isn't there, in terms of what you study, and it may be a little bit further back in time. And this doesn't seem a very fair question, Charlotte, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Is it true that people who take SQE have a skills gap compared to LPC students?
I mean, I find it quite tough to answer, but I think because, especially at BPP, with their Essentials for Practice course, how that's integrated to all the masters, from what I understand, that's pretty much kind of what the LPC used to be like. So you've got that knowledge anyway. And also because you're being assessed to the, certainly in SQE2, you're assessed to the day one solicitor standard. And I think those skills, that's a higher level than the LPC used to be. So I think in that way, you're ahead than maybe you would have been on the LPC.
Very good. Throwing questions at you about being a non-law graduate, doing the LPC, no one knows. But I think you've answered those questions exceptionally well, guys. Thank you very much. I agree. I think where there is a gap in SQE is what we used to do on the LPC in terms of electives and giving students an opportunity to study different topics, different practice areas. So SQE is it is the specification that's what you study. So I would absolutely advocate students studying something like Essentials Practice, which is the module that I have some responsibility for, because that will introduce you to areas like employment law, family law, private acquisitions, debt finance, commercial property, commercial dispute resolution, where you can really take on, and develop the kind of fundamental and not basic, but the core legal stuff you've done and really take it on to another level. So very conscious of time. I know we've overrun by a couple of minutes. And I think probably what I would say in terms of any questions is it's probably best if we defer that until we go into the networking session. I'll just see whether there are any questions in the comments. I don't know, Juliet, is there anything particularly to do with? Oh, there are some questions.
I think possibly lots of questions that come through are specific to certain students. So it might be good to hold on to them until the networking, if that's okay. But thank you so much, everyone, for your insights. We had some really great answers there, and I'm sure that everyone in the audience has learned loads about the SQE. So yeah, as mentioned at the beginning of the session, do check out our SQE FAQs page if you'd like to learn more about the SQE, as we've got dozens of questions up there with answers written by BPP's SQE experts covering a range of different topics. However, as Alison mentioned, today's event is not over yet. We've still got an hour of networking for you to ask all of your questions to the speakers, as I know that there have been quite a lot coming through on the chat as we've gone along. So for those in the audience, you'll need to click on Expo on the left-hand side of your page. once you're in the expo, click on BPP's banner to enter the booth. We'd really recommend sharing your audio and video during the networking so that you can ask your questions directly to the speakers. And then once your question's been answered, it would be great if you could come down off screen to let other students go up, just to make sure that the session runs as smoothly as possible. For our panelists, just hold on tight for a moment and we'll direct you to the networking once this stream has ended. But in the meantime, thank you so much everyone for attending today's session. Best of luck with the SQE, and we hope to see you at more of our events very soon.
Brilliant, thank you.